I sold coffee on that corner for 11 years, so believe me when I tell you I know the faces. Not the famous ones. I don't mean the tourists who come and go like weather. I mean the regulars. The traffic warden who never tipped. The old woman who fed pigeons until somebody told her to stop. The runner who passed at 6:40 every single morning, rain or no rain, like the clock would break if he didn't. And the guards. People think the guards are all the same. Same red tunic, same tall black hat, same blank stare. Tourists treat them like they're statues. They lean in clothes, they pull faces, they wave their hands an inch from a man's nose to see if he'll blink. He never does. That's the whole show, isn't it? The not blinking. People love it. But I'll tell you something. After a while, when you stand on the same patch of pavement long enough, you stop seeing the uniform. You start seeing the man inside it. The way one of them holds his shoulders. The way another shifts his weight when his feet hurt just a fraction, hopping nobody notices. They're men. Cold ones, hot ones, tired ones. Same as the rest of us. But none of them were like him. I'm going to call him Owen because that was his name, and because I think he'd want it said plainly. Owen Reed. Though for the longest time, nobody on that street called him anything but the monster. The first time I saw Owen up close, I nearly dropped a tray of cups. It was a gray morning, the kind London does better than anywhere, not raining, just thinking about it. The light was flat. The tourists hadn't really come out yet. I was setting up my cart, steam already going, and one of the guards rotated into the box near my corner. They do that. They swap men in and out. I didn't look at first. Then I did. And his face. I won't pretend I was gentle about it in my own head. The whole left side of him was burned scar. Not a little mark. The skin was pulled and shiny, melted looking, the way candle wax goes when it's run down the side and set hard. His ear on that side was half gone. The eyebrow was missing. The mouth tugged down at the corner so it looked, all the time, like he was about to say something cruel. I'm ashamed of the first thought I had. I won't write it. It wasn't kind and it wasn't fair, and I've had years to be sorry for it. But I had it, so did everyone. Within a week the street had a story about him, and the street's story was ugly. You have to understand how rumors work around a place like the Palace. There's always a crowd, and a crowd is a hungry thing. It wants a story to chew on. The guards never talk, so people make the talking up for them. With Owen, the face did half the work. People looked at that scarred face and decided it had to come from something terrible. And the human imagination, when it's frightened, doesn't go anywhere good. So the stories grew. A teenager who worked at the souvenir shop 2 doors down told me, dead serious, that Owen had set a fire himself. That he'd done something in the service, something they'd hushed up, and the burns were a punishment that went wrong. A taxi driver swore he'd heard the man had hurt someone. A child once, somebody whispered. Nobody had a name for the child. Nobody had a date. That's the thing about the worst rumors. They never come with details because details can be checked, and these stories were never meant to be checked. They were meant to be felt. By the end of that first month, the name had stuck. The monster, said with a little laugh mostly. The monster's on today. Look, it's the monster. Tourists started asking for him on purpose, the way you'd ask for a haunted house. They'd come to my cart, buy a tea they didn't want, and angle themselves so they could photograph the scars without being obvious about it. They were never as clever as they thought. Owen saw all of it. He had to. He was looking right at them. And he never moved. That was the part that got under people's skin, I think. If he'd flinched, if he'd looked away once, if he'd shown them he was hurt, they'd have softened. People can be decent to a man who lets them see his pain. But Owen gave them nothing. He stood like the building behind him. Eyes front, jaw set, that scarred mouth pulled into its permanent almost snarl. And so they decided the stillness was menace. They decided a man who could stand that still with a face like that must be holding something back. Must be dangerous. I want to be honest with you. For a long time I half believed it too. There was a moment that turned me. It was small. Most turning points are. A little boy, couldn't have been more than 4, got away from his mother near Owen's box. You know how kids are. 1 second they're holding your hand, the next they're a runaway. The mother screamed his name. The boy was heading straight for the road, for the gap where the cars come round, laughing his head off because he thought it was a game. And Owen broke. Not loudly. He didn't shout. Guards aren't supposed to leave the box, aren't supposed to speak, aren't supposed to do anything but stand. But Owen came down off his step in 2 strides, scooped the boy up by the back of his little coat and set him down on the safe side of the rail. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, returned to his place and went still again, eyes front, as if nothing had happened at all. The mother got there a breath later, white as paper. She had the boy in her arms, and she looked up at Owen, at that face, that terrible face, and I saw her open her mouth to say thank you. She couldn't. The face frightened her too much. She just backed away, holding her son, and threw one last frightened look over her shoulder as she went, like Owen was the danger and not the road. He'd saved her boy, and she looked at him like the monster. I closed my cart early that day. I didn't feel like selling coffee. I started watching him properly after that. Not the show, the man. And once I started looking, I saw 100 small things the crowd missed. I saw him stand an extra moment in front of the old veterans who came sometimes, men in their 80s with medals on their chests, the ones who came to remember. He'd hold his salute for them a half-second longer than the drill called for. Nobody noticed but me, and probably them. I saw him on a brutal cold day with a wind that cut right through you, shift his footing so his body blocked the worst of it from a small girl in a wheelchair whose parents had parked her right against the rail. He didn't look at her. He just moved. The wind hit him instead. I saw him watch a pickpocket work the crowd one afternoon, a slick young man with quick hands lifting wallets near the gate, and I saw the exact moment Owen clocked him. The guard's eyes never moved from front, but I followed his line of sight, and there was the thief, and there was a flick of Owen's gaze just once. To the police officer down the rail, the officer caught it, came over. The thief melted away before anything could be proved, but he didn't come back. Owen had warned the crowd without moving a muscle anyone could see. The man everyone called a monster spent his whole shift, every shift, quietly keeping people safe, and every one of them was afraid of him. I used to think about that a lot, wiping down my cart at the end of the day. How a person can do nothing but good and still wear the face of the villain in everyone's story. How the world can look right at the truth and refuse it, because the truth doesn't match the picture they've already painted. I didn't know his story then. I didn't know where the burns came from. I'd stopped believing the ugly rumors, but I had nothing to put in their place. He was just a kind man with a frightening face, doing a hard job in the cold, while strangers called him a monster to his unmoving face. I thought that was the whole story, a sad one but a small one. I had no idea what was coming. She arrived on a Tuesday in late October. I remember it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were slow, and I'd been about to pack up 2 hours early. The crowd was thin. A drizzle had been coming and going all morning, the kind that gets into your collar. The light was doing that strange thing it does in autumn, going gold and gray at the same time, like the sky can't decide. She came up the road on foot, an older woman, 60, maybe a little more. She wore a good coat, dark green, buttoned to the throat, and she walked the way people walk when they've come a long way and they're not going to stop now they're close. Steady. Set. She had a small black handbag held in both hands in front of her, like a shield, or like something she didn't want to lose. I noticed her because she didn't look at anything the way tourists do. She didn't photograph the gates. She didn't gawp at the architecture. She came straight up the pavement and her eyes went to the line of guards, and they moved from one to the next, searching. And they stopped on Owen. I watched her face when she found him. I'll never forget it. Most people, when they first see that scarred face, do the same thing, a little flinch, a quick look away, the breath catching. The widow didn't flinch. She went still. Her whole body went still the way his did. and then her face crumpled, not in fear, in something else. Something that looked almost like grief and almost like relief, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She walked toward him. Now you don't do that. Everyone knows you don't do that. There's a rail, there's a line, and there are signs everywhere telling you to keep your distance from Her Majesty's guards. The tourists who get too close get a sharp word, sometimes a stamp of the boot and a bark, keep back, that makes them jump out of their skins. The guards mean it. It's not theater. They're soldiers. The widow walked right up to the rail, as close as a person could get without climbing it. A few people noticed. They always do. A small knot of tourists drifted over, sensing something, the way crowds sense things. Phones came up. Somebody muttered, "Here we go, the monster's going to lose it," like it was entertainment. Like she was about to get her telling off and they'd all get a video out of it. And Owen looked at her. I mean, he really looked at her. His eyes, which had stayed locked front through every face puller and selfie taker and screaming child for months, his eyes came down and found hers, and something went across that ruined face. A crack, the smallest movement at the corner of the good eye. I was close enough to see it, and I swear to you it was there. He knew her. The crowd didn't understand what they were looking at. They saw a frail woman too close to the scary guard, and they leaned in for the show. The widow set her handbag down on the wet pavement at her feet. She freed her hands, and she reached up slowly, both hands open, no fear in them at all, toward that scarred face that had frightened a whole city. I held my breath. Half the street held its breath. And then she spoke, and though her voice was quiet, the drizzle had hushed everything, and it carried. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. For a moment, nobody moved. Not the crowd, not the woman, not Owen. Then she said it again, softer, and this time it wasn't for the crowd. It was only for him. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I never was. I came a long way to tell you that." And the man everyone called a monster, the man who hadn't moved a true muscle in front of a single soul for as long as I'd watched him, that man's chin dropped. Just an inch. His jaw worked. His throat moved. The eyes that had stared down 1,000 strangers were suddenly wet, and he was fighting it the way men of a certain kind fight it, with everything he had and losing. He didn't break his post. I want to be clear about that because it matters and because I think it would have mattered to him. He didn't step down. He didn't speak. Whatever he was a soldier to the bone, and the discipline held even when the man behind it was coming apart. But the tears came anyway. They ran down the scarred side of his face, over that melted skin, and they didn't fall the way tears fall on smooth skin. They found the ridges and the seams and traced them slow, like water finding its way down a hillside. The crowd had gone dead quiet. The phones were still up, but nobody was laughing now. You could feel it move through them, the sense that they had walked into something, that this was not the show they'd come for, that they were standing in the middle of something private and real, and they didn't know how to leave. The widow's hands were on his arm now. Not his face she'd seen, I think, that touching the face there in front of everyone would have been too much for him, would have broken what little he was holding. So she put her hands on his red sleeve instead, on the arm, and she gripped it, and she leaned her forehead almost to it, and she said something I couldn't hear. Just for him. Whatever it was, his eyes closed when she said it. Closed the way you close your eyes when something you've carried for years is finally set down. I didn't know the story yet, but I knew, watching, that I'd been wrong about everything, that the whole street had been wrong, that whatever had made this woman cross a city to find a scarred guard and tell him she wasn't afraid, it was not the story of a monster. A police officer came over then, gently. He'd been watching too, and he was decent about it. He didn't grab the widow or bark at her. He came up beside her and said something low and kind, a hand near her shoulder but not on it, and she nodded and she straightened up. She wiped her own eyes. She picked her handbag up off the wet ground, and before she stepped back from the rail, she looked up at Owen one more time and said, "Clear enough for me to catch it. He talked about you, you know, right to the end. He never blamed you, not once, and I won't have you blaming yourself a day longer." Then she let the officer walk her a few steps away, and Owen went back to his stillness, eyes front, the tears drying on his ruined face, and the changing of the guard came round not long after and they marched him off, and that was that. Except it wasn't, of course it wasn't. Because now I had to know. I'm not a snoop by nature. 11 years on a corner, you learn that other people's business is their own. But this had happened in front of me, in front of all of us, and I couldn't carry the not knowing. So when the widow came back past my cart slowly, dabbing her eyes, looking suddenly very tired the way people do after a thing like that, I did something I'd never done in 11 years. I came out from behind my cart and I asked her if she'd like a cup of tea. On the house. Somewhere to sit for a minute, out of the drizzle. She looked at me, I think she saw I meant it kindly, and she said yes. I had 2 folding stools behind the cart for when my feet gave out. I set them up under the little awning out of the wet, and I made her a tea, strong, and she wrapped both hands around it, and for a while she just held it and watched the steam. Then she told me. Her name was Alina. Her husband had been called James. Sergeant James, I'll leave the rest of it because she asked me not to put their full name about, and I've kept smaller promises than that one. James had served with Owen. Years back. The 2 of them had been closer than brothers, she said, the way men get when they've been somewhere terrible together and come back. James used to bring Owen home for Sunday dinners when they were both younger men, before the world did what it did to them. Owen had been at their wedding. Owen had been godfather to their daughter. The scarred man on the rail had once been a young soldier laughing at her kitchen table, she said, and she wanted me to understand that, because the city had decided he was something he'd never been. He had the best laugh, she said. Big, you could hear it through walls. James used to say Owen could make a stone wall laugh. I tried to picture it, the big laugh on that ruined mouth. I couldn't quite, and then I could, and it hurt. The fire happened 8 years ago. She told it plainly, the way people tell the worst things, because if you decorate them, they're unbearable. There had been a fire, not in a war, that's what surprised me. People had decided Owen's burns came from some battlefield, some explosion, some heroic disaster overseas. But no, it was here. It was ordinary. It was a block of flats on a cold night, an electrical fault, smoke up the stairwell, the alarms that should have gone and didn't. James and Owen were both off duty. They lived in the same building then, had ended up neighbors, 2 old soldiers a few doors apart, James with his family, Owen on his own. When the smoke came, they did what men like that do without having to decide to do it. They went up, not down where it was safe, up where the people were trapped. They got a lot of them out, a whole floor of them, Alina said, knocking on doors, breaking the ones that wouldn't open, carrying out an old man who couldn't walk, herding a family of frightened children down through smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. They went back up again and again. It was the last time up that did it. There was a child still in one of the flats, a little girl. The parents were out of their minds on the pavement, screaming that their daughter was still inside, and James and Owen went back into a building that the firemen were by then saying nobody should go into. They found her. She was alive, and on the way down, the stairwell gave. Owen had her, Alina said. He had her in his arms when it came down, and he turned. He turned his back to it and he wrapped himself round her and he took it, all of it. The ceiling, the fire, all of it, on his back and his head and the left of his face, so she wouldn't. The little girl lived. Not a mark on her, Alina said. Owen had made himself the wall. James didn't live. He'd been a few steps below, and when the stairwell went, it took him. Not the fire, the fall, the weight of it. He was gone before the ambulances reached him. Owen was found at the bottom, burned half to death, still curled round a child who hadn't a scratch, refusing to let her go even when they tried to lift her from him. Alina stopped there for a while. The tea had gone cold in her hands. I didn't say anything. There's nothing you can say. I just stayed on my stool beside her under the dripping awning and let her have the quiet. "He thinks he killed my James," she said at last. That's the thing I came to fix. He's carried it 8 years. That if he'd gone down first or carried the girl different or been faster, James would have lived. He wrote to me after, long letters, said he was sorry over and over like the saying could undo it. And I couldn't," her voice caught. "I couldn't read them for the longest time, because James was dead and I was angry and Owen was alive and I wasn't kind. God forgive me, I wasn't kind to him when he needed someone to be." She told me she'd lost track of him after that. He'd gone quiet, stopped writing when she stopped answering. She'd heard vaguely that he'd recovered, as much as a man recovers from that, and that he'd somehow gone back into uniform, a different kind, the ceremonial kind, the kind that lets a man stand still and be looked at and never have to explain himself. "I think that's why he chose it," she said, and she almost smiled. Standing there, letting them look, letting them think the worst. I think he felt he deserved it, the starring, the names. I think he stood there every day and let the whole world call him a monster because somewhere in him he believed it. He believed he'd let my husband die and this was his penance, to be looked at, to be feared, to never be allowed to be the man James loved ever again. I had to look away then, down the wet road, because I'm an old man and I didn't want her to see my face. All those months I'd watched him stand there and take it. The phones, the laughing, the children pointing, the mothers backing away with their saved sons, the monsters on today, and the whole time that. "How did you find him?" I asked when I could speak. She told me her daughter had seen a photograph. A tourist's photo, of all things, one of those cruel ones posted online, a guard with a frightening face, captioned with something unkind. And the daughter had looked at it and looked closer and known. The eye. The right eye, the one that hadn't burned. She'd grown up looking at that eye across a Sunday table. She'd known her godfather in a stranger's mocking photograph. "She rang me crying," Eleanor said. "She said, 'Mum, it's Uncle Owen, he's alive, he's right there in London and the whole internet thinks he's a monster.' And I thought," she pressed her lips together, "I thought, I have spent 8 years being too proud and too sad to forgive a good man for surviving, and I am not going to spend a ninth. I got on a train the next morning." She looked down the road, toward the gates, toward the spot where he'd stood. "I had to tell him to his face," she said. "Not in a letter, to his face where he couldn't fold it up and put it away. That James never blamed him. That James, if he could speak, would be furious that Owen turned his life into a punishment. That the girl he saved is grown now, she's at university, she's going to be a doctor, and she's alive because of him. And that I am not afraid of his face, and I never could be, because I know whose face it really is." She finished her cold tea in one go, the way you do when you've said the hard thing, and you just need something to do with your hands. "He's not a monster," she said. "He's the bravest man I ever knew except the one I married. And I'll say it to anyone who'll listen for the rest of my life." She caught her train back that same evening. I walked her to the corner where the taxis come, and she shook my hand with both of hers and thanked me for the tea, and she was gone. I never got away to reach her again. I think, in a way, she'd done the one thing she came to do, and she didn't need a stranger's corner anymore. That's all right. Some people pass through your life for an afternoon and leave it different. But Owen I saw again. The story got round, of course. It always does. Somebody had filmed the widow at the rail. Naturally somebody had, but this time the film did a kind thing instead of a cruel one. You couldn't hear most of what was said, but you could see it. You could see her hands on his red sleeve and the tears on that scarred face and her forehead nearly touching his arm. And whoever posted it didn't post it to mock. They posted it asking, "Does anyone know what this is?" And the daughter saw it, and the daughter answered. She told the whole story plainly, the way her mother had told me, and she put her godfather's name to it, and she said, "This is the man you have been calling a monster. This is what he did. This is what it cost him." It went everywhere. And the street changed. I watched it change from my corner over the weeks that followed. The first thing was that the photos stopped being cruel. The captions changed. People still came to see him more than ever now, but they came differently. They came the way you'd come to pay respects. They stood at the rail and they were quiet. Some of them cried. A young woman left a single white flower at the foot of his box one morning and didn't say why and didn't need to. By the afternoon there were a dozen flowers. By the next day, you couldn't see the base of the box for them. The mothers stopped backing away. I saw one, not the same one, but it might as well have been, lift her small son so he could see Owen properly, and I heard her say, "That man is a hero, that's what a hero looks like." And the boy looked and he didn't see a monster because nobody had told him to. He saw a hero. He waved. And Owen, I swear this is true, Owen, eyes front, jaw set, gave the smallest nod, just for the boy, a thing he was never supposed to do. The old veterans started coming more often, the ones with the medals. They'd stand across from him and hold their salutes the way he'd always held his for them, that extra half second, the soldier's secret language. He'd hold his right back. I'd watch the two of them, the old man on the pavement and the scarred man on the box, saluting each other across the rail like nobody else was there. And I'd have to find something to do with my hands. I never spoke to Owen myself. You don't, while a man's on duty, and somehow it never seemed right to wait for him after. He wasn't mine to thank. But there was one morning, gray again, drizzle again, the street nearly empty the way it had been the day Alina came, when I had the cart open early and he rotated into the box on my corner. And for a second, just a second before the crowds, it was only the two of us out there. And he looked at me. He knew, I think, that I'd given his Alina a cup of tea and a stool out of the rain. Maybe she'd told him in whatever way they'd found to speak after. Maybe he just knew the way men like him know things. But he looked at me across the wet pavement, and that ruined mouth that always looked like it was about to say something cruel, it didn't. It did something else. The corner of it, the good corner, lifted. The smallest fraction. And he gave me the nod, the same one he'd given the little boy. I lifted my coffee cup to him, like a toast. It was the only thing I could think to do. Then the first tourists came round the corner, and his eyes went front, and he was the king's guard again, still as the stone behind him, and the moment was over. I think about him often now. I've since retired the cart. 11 years was enough, and my knees had opinions, but I still go back sometimes on a gray morning and buy a coffee from the young woman who took over my pitch and stand across from the box and watch. He's still there, older now. The scars don't fade, but the street's eyes have. The children who point at him point with wonder these days, not fear. There's a small brass plaque the Veterans Association had put up nearby, not nomming him directly. He wouldn't have stood for that, but marking the building that burned and the people who went up when everyone else came down. He stands not far from it. I don't think that's an accident. I've turned it over 100 times, what I learned that autumn, and it always comes back to the same place. We are so quick to look at a face and write the whole man underneath it. We saw the scars and we wrote a villain, because villains are easy, because a frightening face is a frightening story, and we'd rather have a frightening story than do the harder work of asking how a man comes to be marked like that. We made him a monster because it cost us nothing, and it cost him everything, and he let us, because he believed we were right. It took a widow in a green coat, a woman who'd lost more to that fire than any of us could imagine, who'd have had more right than anyone to blame him, and who came all that way to do the opposite. To stand at a rail in the rain, in front of a crowd of strangers waiting for a show, and put her hands on a scarred man's arm, and say the truest thing I've ever heard said on that street. I'm not afraid of you. 5 words. They undid 8 years of a man's penance and a whole city's cruelty in the time it takes to say them. I'm an old man and I don't have many lessons worth handing on, but I'll hand you that one. The next time you're certain that you know what someone is, just from the look of them, from the scar or the silence or the story the crowd is telling you, stop. Look again. Look at the eyes, the way Alina looked, because the monster in front of you might be the bravest man you'll ever stand near. And he might be waiting, behind a face the whole world got wrong, for just one person to look him in the eye and not be afraid. I hope you're the one who does it. I hope for you There's someone who will do it for you too.